I'm going to be ranking every division by roster strength. We're going to start with the AFC East roster rankings, and I'm going to go through each and reveal them as we go. We're going to go from 4 up to 1. Probably. Sounds good. Also, I have a dog on the bed, so if it interrupts, don't mind it. We're going to start off here. Number 4, or should we go from the top? We're going to go from the bottom, and we're going to do number 4, the New England Patriots. The Patriots still have an alright roster, but this division is a very, very good division, and there's a lot of concerning position groups on this team, like wide receiver is a glaring one to me. Juju is their wide receiver 1. I don't know how good I'm feeling about that if I'm a Patriots fan. It's also a very loaded division, so you do have to take it with a grain of salt. The third best roster in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills. And again, the Bills have a pretty good roster. They have an elite wide receiver 1, Stephon Diggs, great young quarterback in Josh Allen, and a good defense. They lost guys like Tremaine Edmonds, but still have both safeties, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. It is a good defense, but there are 2 other teams that are very, very good, at least roster-wise, in this division. And we're going to go now to number 2, which will be the New York Jets. And the big pushover on this one is Aaron Rodgers. Now that they do have the elite quarterback, I believe this will put their roster over the top. They have an elite wide receiver like Garrett Wilson. Obviously, he still has more to prove, but he is really, really good. Breece Hall, if he didn't go down, could have won that Offensive Rookie of the Year as well that Garrett Wilson did win. And then they have guys like Sauce Gardner, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Quinnen Williams, who needs an extension but should be back. And just an overall great defense. This Jets roster is very, very good, but not as good as number 1, which is the Miami Dolphins, the speediest team probably all time. Is it crazy to say? It's the quickest team to ever, quickest roster at least, with guys like Raheem Mostert, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, now drafting Devin Achane from Texas A&M, who was a track runner at Texas A&M, another running back speedster. This Dolphins roster added Jalen Ramsey in the offseason. I already have elite defensive players like Christian Wilkins, Javon Holland, Bradley Chubb last year. They brought him from the Broncos off the edge. It's overall a great roster, and there's no weakness. Corner would have been the weakness, but they went and got Jalen Ramsey and then drafted Cam Smith, who I really liked out of South Carolina. So overall, this may be one of the best top 3 roster in the league for sure. May be the best roster. Could be. On paper, it's a great team. That's all I know. So that wraps up the AFC East portion. My next division I'm doing is the AFC North, and this one is very challenging. Also, disclaimer, I am sunburnt, as you can tell. My apologies. Looks like I'm Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. But AFC North was very tough for me, and this is going to be a little controversial, probably. Not going to lie to you. So we're going to go again from 4 up to 1. I'm going to give a little explanation. Now, again, loaded division. These are the 2 best divisions in football. It's going to be hard to dispute that when you look at the rosters, that these are the best 2 divisions. Last place, the Baltimore Ravens. I know it's crazy. Lamar's on that team, elite, but I think Lamar is a huge part of that team, and they do have a good defense, we know that, but their edge rusher group and corner group are pretty thin when you actually look at it. Wide receiver is upgraded, but still not that great, because if Odell isn't really good, it may not be the best. So those are 3 cores right there that aren't necessarily amazing. Running backs, all right, with J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill. I would say that's a plus group, but it's still not amazing. So you see what I'm saying? Even the O-line isn't elite, and the D-line. So I would have to, in a very competitive division that has a ton of stars in it, put them right below my number 3 team, which now this will make sense, kind of, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you may disagree with this, honestly, that you think the Ravens have a better roster, but I would just say that the star power on the Steelers, defensive-wise, puts them over the top of the Ravens. Guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Defensive Player of the Year, TJ Watt, Cameron Hayward, who's still highly productive. Those guys in itself. Patrick Peterson, I know he's older and people might not like that, but those are some good players on defense. And then it's a young core on offense. George Pickens looks like he could be a star. So that's just my rationale. You may not agree with it, and I'm all right with that. Like that makes sense if you don't agree with it. But just star-wise, you have the highest paid defense, and it does have huge names on it. Former Defensive Player of the Year. I would take the Steelers roster probably over the Ravens here. Now, my second best roster is the Cincinnati Bengals. Remember, this isn't how good the teams are. This is how good their roster is. And the Bengals lack in some areas that the number one team, as you can infer, don't. The Bengals have a great wide receiver room. We all know that. They added Charlie Jones from Purdue to upgrade that if Tyler Boyd decides to leave and get a bigger role on another team. But there's some corners a little concerning. I know they got DJ Turner this year. And edge rusher, they added Myles Murphy. It's a good roster. Safety is pretty concerning with Jesse Bates and Von Bell leaving. So there's some holes. And the team that's number one doesn't really have those holes. It's the Cleveland Browns. Now again, everyone may say, oh, but they got fourth last year. They did, and they had a good roster then too, so it's not about their performance. If you look at the Cleveland Browns on paper, their roster does not really have a hole. As long as middle linebacker is solid enough with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, I mean, what hole do they really have on this roster? Elite O-line, elite running back. Deshaun Watson has the potential to be amazing. I know he wasn't last year for sure, but we've seen it before, so it could happen. That's all I'm saying. It's a hypothetical. The wide receiver room upgraded with Elijah Moore. They have Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Corner, they have Greg Newsome. They have Denzel Ward. It's tough, man. They have Ronnie Harrison. Ooh, where did they get rid of him? I'm not sure, but they have Grant Delpit as well. They have names. Then D-line was the big thing, run stopping. And they have now Myles Garrett. On the other side, they have Zadarius Smith and Okoronkwo from the Texans. That's scary. They were always complaining about Myles Garrett had no help, and they went and got him help. So, yeah. The Browns roster is completely filled out. Drafted Siaki Ika as well. It's the best roster in this division by a good margin, I would say, honestly. By a good margin. Yeah, so the Browns are number one there. And the most debatable ones I'd say here are 3 and 4. You could probably switch those, and I'd be all right with it. But other than that, the Browns are going to be scary this year if they can piece it together. Now to the AFC West, we're going to go again 4-1. And this one isn't, again, I have to really emphasize, because the Super Bowl champs are in this division, that this is not how good the team is. It is how their roster is constructed. How good of a roster on paper do they have? And it doesn't really matter when you have Patrick Mahomes. But that's not really, I'm looking at the full roster, if that makes sense. So let's go to it now, starting at 4. At number 4, we have the Las Vegas Raiders. And they just have so many defensive holes still. They drafted Tyree Wilson 7th overall. There's just so much work to be done. The corner room needs help. The D-tackle room really needs help. There's reports that Jimmy Garoppolo failed his physical and may not be able to play for the Las Vegas Raiders. Also a huge deal. So there's a lot to think about in Las Vegas, but the defense really just needs help pretty badly, other than Max Crosby and hopefully Tyree Wilson in the mix. So now the third best roster, the Kansas City Chiefs. So be careful. Don't be like, because when you really look at it, their roster isn't oh so great. They had Sky Moore, Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Last year they had Juju. That's about it. I mean, they had Kadarius Toney coming at the end, not do much at receiver, but contribute in other ways. They had a 7th-round rookie, 7th-round rookie, Isaiah Pacheco, running around at running back instead of their first-rounder. It's not a great roster when you look at it. They got rid of their O-linemen. They have 2 fresh new tackles, Jawan Taylor, and I mean, every year we look at it, we say, oh, they're not going to be good, and then Patrick Mahomes pulls it off. So the roster really isn't that great, but we know Patrick Mahomes is that great. On to the number 2 team in this division, the Denver Broncos, who are a good team. They added Zach Allen off the edge. where they left Bradley Chubb when they traded him to the Dolphins for a first rounder. And they have Sean Payton now is who they got for the first rounder from the Saints. Or they traded to the Saints, for Sean Payton. So the Broncos now, we know they still have Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, Javonte Williams, Greg Dulcich, Russell Wilson. They have some fun players. Pat Surtain, Justin Simmons. I mean, these are good players. Zach Allen's a huge pickup from the Cardinals, who are kind of selling right now, literally. And yeah, this Broncos roster is good when you look at it. They just really need to piece together the new coaching, and Russell Wilson is a big part of it. And to our last one, the Los Angeles Chargers, in my mind, have the best roster. I wouldn't say it's a huge gap between them and the Broncos. Broncos do have a really good roster, and I think it's a bit underrated by people. Their O-line would be their weakness. But the Chargers have stars at a lot of places if they're healthy. J.C. Jackson last year was the one that went down with a huge injury, and before that did not look good at all. Coming from the Patriots was a huge signing. But they still have Asante Samuel, Derwin James. They have really good players, and Joey Bosa on that team. Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler potentially staying, Justin Herbert, drafted Quentin Johnston, have Gerald Everett, Rashawn Slater. I mean, it's a roster. It is a real good roster. I remember the Chargers were a cheat code on Madden at the beginning of last year, and even probably at the end. But we know that's a very powerful roster if they can put it together and stay healthy. They had the injury bug big time last year. If their guys stay healthy this year, watch out. On to the AFC South. We're going to start again, 4-1. And our fourth best roster, who's pretty defense heavy, would be the Tennessee Titans. Their wide receiver room is just very bad, along with the O-line and some aging players on the defense. Jeffrey Simmons still there, great. Tierra Tart, a bunch of fun players, but that still would have to rank the last just because how bad the wide receiver core is, and the O-line is not great at all. So Tennessee is going to be my last team there. Still have fun guys like Kevin Byard as well, but yeah, they're going to fall last. And my third best roster is going to be the Houston Texans. Now, that might be a little controversial because Tennessee still does have some cool players on defense, but the Texans have put together a fun little team now, bringing in some vets like Jimmy Ward. They got Sheldon Rankins. They brought in Dalton Schultz. They drafted C.J. Stroud. They have John Mechie. Brought in Robert Woods, actually from the Titans. And still have Nico Collins. Damian Pierce was very promising last year. Derek Stingley as well. They have Christian Harris at linebacker. Their O-line is the thing that kind of separates them from the Titans, in my mind, at least in this roster scenario. So, yeah, Laramie Tunsil being a top tackle was probably one of the big separators, if I had to say. On to the roster number 2 is going to be the Indianapolis Colts, and they still have elite running back in Jonathan Taylor. They still have Michael Pittman Jr. They still have Quentin Nelson, and they added a ton of athletes on defense. They still have DeForest Buckner, Kenny Moore, some really cool players. EJ Speed, kind of not as relevant, but cool player. I like that roster on defense a ton, and Michael Pittman's a great receiver. Alec Pierce also could be a really nice second option if he grows a little bit, not physically, but grows as a player. And Anthony Richardson, man, his upside is there. I'm not really ranking this based off of that, but it's already a great roster. And our number 1 roster will be the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars have Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk. Right there's all I really need to hear. Evan Ingram's also pretty good as of last year. And they have a decent O-line. Walker Little, we'll see what he can be. Anton Harrison was their first round selection. And yeah, I would say they're pretty offense heavy when I'm ranking this, or not when I'm ranking this in general, but for the Jaguars to be above these teams, they just have the best offense for sure when it comes to roster, and it clears the difference between offense and defense in any of these other teams. So that wraps up the AFC South. I'll be transitioning over to the NFC now. We're going to start with the NFC East. And the fourth team, the worst roster in this division, I believe, is the Washington Commanders. They do have a stellar front seven, but corner gets pretty thin. They have Kendall Fuller and rookie Emmanuel Forbes, and their O-line is not great, along with their running back room and even quarterback room compared to the other teams in this division. I love their front seven. It is downright awesome. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, those kind of guys. Awesome. Jonathan Allen. Just a great room. Love it a ton. But they do lack in some other places. Corner, wide receivers, good room. O-line really hurts. And linebackers, pretty thin. Everything other than front seven isn't the best. Wide receiver core is all right, but they'll stick at the 4 spot. The 3 spot will be the New York Giants for me. And they have Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones. I don't really have that much of an opinion on Daniel Jones. I think he's all right. But Saquon's very good. They don't have much of a wide receiver core. They added Darren Waller, have a below average offensive line, and they have a pretty decent defense all around with Kayvon Thibodeau, added Bobby Okereke, and drafted Deonte Banks at corner. I like that a lot. So I think their roster as a whole, when you look at it, with their skill positions, is better than the Commanders, but not by really much, I would say. It's very debatable. I just trust their corners and Deonte Banks more than I do Kendall Fuller and Emmanuel Forbes, and that's it. So the Giants will be 3 for me there. The second best team in this division roster-wise would be the Dallas Cowboys with the additions of Stephon Gilmore, Brandon Cooks. They already have CeeDee Lamb. They have Tony Pollard, Dak Prescott. They have some really fun players. Micah Parsons, big one. So the Cowboys roster we know is pretty good, and they're going to be contenders every year or around that divisional round area. Seems where they usually tend to get kicked out, sadly, for Cowboys fans. But it's still a really solid roster, and it gets them to the playoffs consistently. The number 1 team, consensus, one of the best rosters, another top 3 in the NFL, is the Philadelphia Eagles, who made the Super Bowl last year and added even more talent with Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Kelee Ringo, all kinds of guys in the draft this year. They had a home run of a draft by Howie Roseman, adding to an already elite team of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, those kind of guys. It's going to be a crazy team. Darius Slay still there. James Bradbury still there. Really good team, and one of the best rosters in the league. Now to the NFC North, where we're going to start with the worst roster in this division, and it's still, even with all the big upgrades with Tremaine Edmonds as a huge free agent, they brought in Kaiser White as well. Big middle linebacker upgrades. The Bears here, they got DJ Moore, which was a great pickup from the Carolina Panthers, and that swap for the first overall pick. This roster still needs a lot of work on that front seven. Their leading sack getter, what would you call that? Leading sacker last year was a safety. And that's just not a good stat to have as a defense. So the Bears still have a lot of work. They have Darnell Mooney, DJ Moore, and Chase Claypool. Much more encouraging. I like it a lot. But their O-line is still not the best. Still needs work for sure with Darnell Wright. They added. That's great. They did make improvements. Don't get me wrong. Not knocking on the Bears. They're headed in the right direction, and they will be a good team, I believe. But their roster construction still needs plenty, and they spent a lot of money in. I didn't really love the spending that much money in the linebacker situation, but I get it. I get it for sure, and they added good value. The third best roster, or I'll just say the third roster in the rankings here in the NFC North would be the Minnesota Vikings, and they're kind of in a weird spot because they still have Kirk Cousins, who's aging, and they still have Justin Jefferson, who's amazing and young, very young. They had a Jordan Addison this year, but their secondary is just very rough. Very rough. And they gave away some defensive players as well to the Browns. They still have Danielle Hunter, but Zadarius Smith gone to the Browns. Also, they gave away, what's D-tackle's name? I can't think. D-tackle, I'm talking about Dalvin Tomlinson. So they gave away some pretty good players. Adam Thielen gone to the Panthers as well. They're in a very weird spot to me. and their roster is kind of in a hover between rebuild and trying to somewhat stay in contention. They added Marcus Davenport off the edge from the Saints, so I would rank them third in this division. And second will be the Green Bay Packers, actually. Very, very young weapons on offense with, already Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs from last year, Jordan Love still very young. It's Luke Musgrave. They have a ton of these guys. It's Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion as well. Super young offense, but great defense. Rashawn Gary, Jair Alexander. It's still a really, really heavy defense there, and they know how to run that defense pretty well. So that I still like the Packers roster for sure, and they still have those star names. So that is why I'm giving them the number 2 spot. And the number 1 spot, the Detroit Lions, actually. And again, they do have holes to fill still, but they've added to the middle linebacker position with Jack Campbell. They have Jahmyr Gibbs. They have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, also great. And on defense, they added a lot at the corner position. Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley were great pickups. I know people scrutinize their first round of the draft, but this roster is coming together pretty nice, especially with their offensive weapons. And the thing that sells it for me to put it at number 1 here is far and away by any of these teams, they have a top 3 O-line in the NFL. And that's the difference maker in this NFC North roster rankings. It's the fact that they have similar weapons to all of these other teams. I know the Vikings have Justin Jefferson, but after that, it's a rookie, Jordan Addison, who will be good. But after that, it's no one, KJ Osborne. So they have similar weapons. They have a good wide receiver core as well. And they have the elite O-line by Penei Sewell, Taylor Decker, all of these guys. They're great on the O-line. So that is why they will get the number 1 spot. The NFC West is probably my easiest task when doing these roster rankings because they all pretty much fit into their spots for their reasons, and I will explain now. So the worst roster by far in the NFL, I said it, in the NFL, the Arizona Cardinals. And they've been pretty clear. They released DeAndre Hopkins yesterday. They've been pretty clear that they are just absolutely selling ship and are in rebuild mode. They traded that 3rd pick back for a first rounder from the Houston Texans for next year, which will be very valuable to them. I mean, they could possibly be looking at Caleb Williams next year if they decide to move on from Kyler Murray. But they let Zach Allen go. They let, like I just said, DeAndre Hopkins, they released him. Buda Baker requested a trade. It's not looking so great roster-wise over there. It's my clear last pick in this NFC West division. My 3rd pick, even though they do have stars, Cooper Kupp, Aaron Donald, Matthew Stafford, they have good players on this team. They're old. They don't have anything other than those good players. Their corner room is absolutely atrocious without Jalen Ramsey now. It's not looking great over there either. But the difference between them and the Arizona Cardinals is they do have at least a couple stars. Cooper Kupp is amazing. Aaron Donald is amazing. Matthew Stafford, when healthy, is amazing. So they have that edge. But other than that, they're still the 3rd best team in this division. The 2nd best team, roster-wise, would be the Seattle Seahawks. And the Seahawks made a lot of key additions. They got Jackson Smith and Jigba in the draft, pick 20, drafted Devin Witherspoon at pick 5. They now have Tariq Woolen and Devin Witherspoon. Great little duo at corner. Brought back Bobby Wagner. Great. Bring back Draymond Jones, they acquired from the Denver Broncos in free agency. D-tackle, huge pickup there. They have a pretty solid roster now. Tyler Lockett still playing. DK Metcalf still playing. Kenneth Walker, beast. Zach Charbonnet they added, running back out of UCLA. I really like what's going on in Seattle with their roster construction, and it might be number 1 in some other divisions, but the San Francisco 49ers still get number 1 here for the tools they have. Christian McCaffrey, Trey Lance in my mind would be the starter. Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Javon Hargrave now, Nick Bosa. It's getting a little crazy over there. they've got some stars, and I just named a bunch of them. So that is my NFC West roster rankings. The top two are pretty clear, pulled off from those bottom two, not even close. And I think this is how the standings may look at the end of the year. And I'm pretty confident in that one. The NFC South seems to be very close in record, but I'm going to have to take a step back and look at just roster construction. And this is what I came up with. Last place in this would be the Atlanta Falcons, who are moving promisingly. They still need some edge rush help really badly, and that wasn't really addressed highly in the draft. They went Bijan Robinson, still a great pick, but they have some glaring holes. Still, wide receiver is a huge one for them. They're rolling out Mac Hollins, getting a lot of targets. They still have Kyle Pitts at tight end, great player, but they have a lot to work on still. Very promising, adding Jesse Bates, but they still have a lot to work on and are going to be last in this. In roster, third now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a tough one to do because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are still great. They still have Vita Vea, Levante David, Antoine Winfield, players of that caliber. It's Tristan Wirfs on this team. It's a good roster. It really is. But I fear that some of these guys are a little bit past their prime, and I'm going to end up putting Carolina ahead of them. Now, hear me out. Hear me out. Brian Burns, Jeremy Chin, J.C. Horn, Derek Brown. It's Bradley Bozeman. They have these. Frankie Louvu even is a really promising, young, good player. They added Hayden Hurst, Miles Sanders, who's solidified good. For me, the Buccaneers, they have Tristan Wirfs, but other than that, on that O-line, I don't love it. Luke Godecki was horrible last year. Their running game was also last in the league. Really, really bad. Rachaad White is currently their running back one, who's a great pass catcher, but who's really toting that rock, who's pounding it up the middle? I don't really know. To me, I know that the Panthers have a great run game. They have Miles Sanders now, Chuba Hubbard. They're going to utilize those guys. Wide receiver core, I would definitely give the lean towards the Buccaneers with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Russell Gage. But you have to remember that it's not that far off now. It is a good gap, I'll acknowledge that. But now, Thielen, Terrace Marshall, I think will take a big step up. Some of these guys, man, it's really not that far. Thielen is older, and again, so is Mike Evans. Mike Evans will definitely be better than Thielen, but I don't think the gap is that far. And the Panthers' O-line is far better. Ike Mekwonu, far better than this Buccaneers O-line, and they have those tools on defense that I think are better than older Vita Vea and Levante David and Antoine Winfield. So I will stick the Panthers. That could be very controversial, but hear me out and see. Let me know if you disagree with that down below. It's very valid if you do. Number one is going to be the New Orleans Saints, who, from a simple experience and how good players are if they're healthy standpoint, this roster is still a good roster. It's a playoff roster. It's an NFC South champion roster. Michael Thomas, Marshawn Lattimore. They have the dudes. Alvin Kamara. They still have the guys on their roster. They added Chris Olave last year, who was great, even though he got banged up a lot. They still have the dudes. They added Derek Carr. This is a NFC South champion roster, the best roster for sure. Alontae Taylor played out of his mind in his rookie year out of Tennessee last year. So the Saints are going to take that top spot. And that is going to wrap up my NFL roster rankings by division. We went through every division. I would like to hear the most controversial picks below and let me know what you think of the video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch y'all next time.